Welcome to Whispers of Poirot, where every shadow hides a story. Kindly like and subscribe to Whispers of Poirot Mysteries. Which part of the world are you watching from? Let us begin. Chapter 1. The Dry Day Anomaly. It was a day so dry that even the fountains in the square seemed embarrassed to be flowing. Their thin arcs of water rose dutifully into the air, glittered for an instant beneath the pale sun, and fell back with a subdued splash, as though apologizing for the extravagance. The pavements beyond the Grand Meridian Hotel were bleached to a uniform gray. Carriage wheels raised faint sighs of dust, and the sky stretched overhead in a flawless blue expanse, untroubled by the smallest cloud. Yet there, in the polished brass umbrella stand of the Grand Meridian Hotel, stood one umbrella dripping with recent rain. He observed it while pretending to admire the symmetry of its companions. There were 6 in total, arranged with unconscious order, 2 of sober brown, 1 striped in green and navy, 1 of faded tartan, and finally the black silk umbrella, whose presence disturbed the harmony of the collection. The lobby floor shone untouched by weather. The revolving doors sighed with idle rotation, each time a guest entered or departed, admitting nothing more dramatic than a breath of warm, dry air. No coat bore dampness. No shoe left a trace upon the tiles. A single object out of place is like a cracked note in a symphony. It demands attention. The umbrella's canopy glistened faintly, as though it had been shaken but not thoroughly dried. Its ferrule, the metal tip, carried a clot of stubborn clay, not the pale dust of the city square, but a darker, heavier soil. Moist, I felt at once that it had returned from a journey its owner denied. It was my habit, during periods of rest, to cultivate the art of observation without appearing to do so. The Grand Meridian offered an agreeable refuge, discreet service, comfortable rooms, and a clientele of sufficient respectability to render scandal unlikely. Though never impossible, I had taken a seat in the lobby with a small volume of poetry, allowing my gaze to drift idly above its pages. The umbrella intruded upon my peace like an uninvited thought. "Remarkable weather," I remarked to the concierge, who stood behind the desk polishing his spectacles with habitual care. "Quite exceptional, sir," he agreed. "We have not seen rain in nearly a fortnight, and yet," I said mildly, "someone has prepared for a storm." He followed the direction of my glance. "Ah, the umbrella. Guests often carry them as precaution." "Indeed. But this one appears to have fulfilled its precautionary purpose." The concierge leaned forward slightly. "I had not noticed." "That," I replied gently, "is because you observed the expected." He smiled, uncertain whether to take offense. "Shall I inquire as to its owner?" "In due course." For the moment I preferred contemplation to action. The umbrella stand stood not far from a marble column that supported the high ceiling. From that vantage, I could examine the object without attracting attention. A faint droplet fell from one of its ribs and struck the brass rim of the stand with a delicate sound. Drip, a small, insistent confession. At 3 o'clock precisely, the revolving door admitted a gentleman of compact build and neat attire. He removed his hat, revealing hair brushed meticulously back from a broad forehead. His expression was composed, his eyes alert. He paused, as though orienting himself, then crossed the lobby toward the reception desk. It is sometimes the instinct of the observer to observe himself. I noted with detached amusement that I had straightened slightly in my chair. "Good afternoon," said the gentleman to the concierge. "I am Mr. Edwin Talbot. I believe a room has been reserved in my name." The name would soon acquire significance. At that moment, it was merely a sound. The concierge consulted the register. "Yes, sir, room 22, a pleasant aspect overlooking the square." Mr. Talbot inclined his head. "That will suffice." As he signed, I studied him. He possessed the air of a man accustomed to negotiation. His suit, though modest in cut, was of fine cloth. His hands bore the faint ink stains of one who handled documents frequently. When he completed the form, he placed the pen down with deliberate care. "May I ask," he said casually, "if Mr. Leonard Pierce is in residence?" The concierge glanced again at the register. "Room 17, sir. He arrived this morning." Excellent. The word was spoken lightly, yet it carried weight. Mr. Talbot turned, and for a fleeting instant his gaze met mine. There was curiosity in it, perhaps recognition. He seemed to consider approaching me, then thought better of it, and proceeded toward the lift. I watched him depart. Leonard Pierce. The name lingered in my thoughts like a note struck upon a piano and left to resonate. Moments later, another figure emerged from the corridor leading to the dining room. This gentleman was taller, leaner, with a complexion pale beneath the afternoon light. His movements were measured, economical. He paused by the umbrella stand. He did not touch the wet umbrella. Instead, he regarded it briefly, as one might acknowledge an acquaintance in passing. Then he selected a newspaper from a nearby table and seated himself within view of the entrance. He unfolded the paper, but his eyes did not at once descend to its pages. They remained fixed upon the revolving door. I rose and approached the stand. To inspect an umbrella openly is to invite inquiry. To admire its craftsmanship, however, is an innocent indulgence. Fine workmanship, I observed aloud. The tall gentleman lowered his newspaper. You admire umbrellas, sir. I admire anomalies. He smiled faintly. And this one is anomalous. In a city without rain, I should say so. He folded the newspaper neatly. Perhaps it was used elsewhere. Elsewhere, in the suburbs perhaps. Weather is a capricious creature. True, and yet clay of this density is seldom found in suburban lanes. His gaze sharpened almost imperceptibly. You are a man of detail. It is my profession. May I inquire? Hercule Poirot. Recognition flickered. Of course, I have read of your cases. And you, monsieur? Leonard Pierce. The name settled between us. I said. Then perhaps you can satisfy my curiosity. Is this umbrella yours? He glanced toward it. It is. You have encountered rain today. The answer was immediate. And yet it is wet. He rose and examined it more closely. Curious, he murmured. I left it here upon my arrival. I have not touched it since. You arrived this morning. Yes, shortly before noon. And before that, I traveled from the north, by rail, indeed. Did it rain upon your journey? He hesitated a fraction of a second. I believe there were showers earlier in the day. I see. He straightened. Is this of importance? That remains to be determined. His expression did not alter, yet I sensed a subtle withdrawal, a drawing inward. I assure you, he said evenly, I have not been outdoors since I entered the hotel. Then someone else has been attentive to your umbrella. An improbable kindness, or an improbable oversight. He studied me. You suspect me of something, Mr. Poirot. My dear sir, I suspect everyone of something. It is how one arrives at the truth. A silence followed, courteous yet charged. At that moment, the lift doors opened, and Mr. Talbot emerged once more. His face bore a faint flush, as though from agitation rather than exertion. He approached Mr. Pierce directly. Mr. Pierce, he said, with a politeness too deliberate to be sincere. A word, if you please. Pierce inclined his head. Certainly. They moved a short distance away, near the base of the staircase. Their voices were low, yet fragments reached my attentive ear. The document. Inconvenient. You must reconsider. I will not be intimidated. The exchange lasted scarcely 2 minutes. Mr. Talbot's hand made a sharp, emphatic gesture. Pierce's remained at his side. At last Talbot said, more audibly, very well, tomorrow then, Pierce replied. Tomorrow, they separated. Talbot returned to the lift. Pierce resumed his seat and unfolded his newspaper once more, this time reading it with evident absorption. I turned again to the umbrella. The droplet upon its rib had ceased to fall. The clay upon its ferrule retained its dark hue tomorrow. The word carried promise or threat. The afternoon advanced. Guests drifted in and out. Tea was served. Conversation resumed its customary volume. Yet beneath the surface of polite society, there stirred a current I could not ignore. A dry day, an umbrella wet with recent rain, 2 men bound by a document described as inconvenient. Such matters do not resolve themselves. As the clock above the reception desk struck 5, I made a small note in my pocket diary, the anomaly of moisture in a season of drought. It is from such small irregularities that the greatest storms arise. I did not yet know that within 24 hours, one of those men would lie dead in his room, and that the umbrella, so modest, so ordinary, would stand as silent witness to a journey denied. But already I felt the first tremor of design. In a world parched of rain, someone had carried a storm indoors. Chapter 2. The guest who never left the umbrella belonged, according to the brass tag fixed neatly upon its curved silver handle, to Mr. Leonard Pierce, a gentleman of discreet manners and punctual habits. The tag bore not merely his name but also the room number. 17, engraved with such precision that one might suppose the object itself conscious of its owner's fastidious nature. Mr. Pierce assured the manager, and afterward myself, that he had not left the hotel since breakfast. His shoes were dry, polished to a dull gleam, his cuffs immaculate, and his room key, as the attentive clerk declared, had not been surrendered at the desk throughout the day. Such details compose a portrait of innocence. Yet innocence arranged too carefully may resemble stage scenery, convincing from a distance, but false to the touch. I asked him about the umbrella. He smiled politely and claimed it had rested untouched in the stand all day. But umbrellas, like reputations, I observed gently, gather marks from their travels. It was late afternoon when this small matter presented itself to my notice. Outside, the sky over the city hung low and heavy, a dull pewter dome threatening rain, yet withholding it with stubborn restraint. Within the lobby of the Grand Meridian Hotel there prevailed an atmosphere of subdued agitation. Guests spoke in murmurs. The staff moved with a strained composure that betrayed anxiety beneath professional courtesy, for in room 22, scarcely 2 floors above us, a gentleman named Mr. Edwin Talbot had been found dead. The police had not yet arrived. The manager, Mr. Hollis, had sent urgently for them. But in the interim, he had appealed to me. It was his good fortune, or perhaps his misfortune, that Hercule Poirot was a guest under his roof at the moment. Calamity struck. Mr. Talbot had been discovered by a chambermaid shortly after 4 o'clock. He lay upon the carpet near the writing desk, one hand extended as if in supplication toward a small leather dispatch case that rested just beyond his reach. The windows were closed, the door locked from within. No weapon lay in sight. The physician, hastily summoned, pronounced the cause of death to be a narrow wound to the chest, inflicted with remarkable precision. Death would have been swift. A locked room and no weapon. Such problems possess a certain theatrical charm. Yet for the victim, the matter is without charm entirely. I had been examining the writing desk when Mr. Hollis informed me of the umbrella. It stood in the lobby, inconspicuous among several others, yet distinct in its polished handle and engraved tag. What drew my attention was not its elegance, but the faint darkened smear upon its ferrule, the metal tip that meets the ground. It was not mud, it was something darker. Who claims this? I asked. Mr. Leonard Pierce, sir, said the manager. Room 17, a most reliable gentleman. A solicitor, I believe. Indeed. Mr. Pierce was summoned. He entered the lobby with calm deliberation. He was of middle height, lean, with hair parted precisely at the center and a face of composed intelligence. His eyes were pale gray and steady, his mouth thin but courteous. You wish to see me, Mr. Poirot? I thank you for coming so promptly. This umbrella, I understand, is yours. He glanced at it and inclined his head. Yes, I keep it here for convenience. You have not used it today. Number, I have remained within the hotel since breakfast. I worked in my room throughout the morning. Ah, you are certain? Entirely. Forgive my persistence. The afternoon has been unsettled. One imagines a gentleman might step out briefly for air. He shook his head. I had no such inclination. His manner was measured. Each reply delivered without haste. without visible strain. And yet, I continued, there is upon the ferrule a mark. Observe. He bent slightly. For the briefest instant, his gaze flickered, not in alarm, but in calculation. It may have been so from yesterday, he said. I cannot account for every blemish. Quite so. Umbrellas endure the indignities of pavements. He straightened. Is there some relevance to this? I regarded him thoughtfully, perhaps. Tell me, Mr. Pierce, did you know Mr. Talbot? He hesitated. Not long, but perceptibly. We were acquainted. Acquainted. He approached me yesterday evening. He had a matter of legal interest to discuss, a document requiring review. And you consented? I informed him that I was on holiday. I suggested he consult my office upon our return to town. Was he satisfied? A mild word. Did he visit you this morning? Numbered. Did you visit him? Certainly not. The certainty rang clear. I thanked him and allowed him to withdraw. Mr. Hollis exhaled audibly once he had gone. You suspect him, my dear sir? I replied. I suspect everyone. It is a habit that has served me well. We ascended to the second floor, room 20. 2 remained undisturbed since the physician's examination. The body lay as described, a dark stain spreading across the waistcoat. The dispatch case upon the desk stood open. Its contents, papers neatly arranged, had been examined but not yet catalogued. The window caught my attention. Thou closed and latched. A faint draught stirred the curtain. I approached and examined the frame. There, along the sill, I detected a faint smear akin in color to that upon the umbrella's ferrule. Below the window ran a narrow stone ledge, a decorative projection no wider than 6 inches, extending along the façade. It connected, by architectural accident, to the ledge outside room 17. I leaned out carefully. The stone bore slight scuffing. It was a dangerous path, certainly, but not impossible for a man of steady nerve. I returned inside. Locked doors often invite admiration, yet windows are less sentimental. The question formed itself, had someone traversed that narrow ledge from one room to another? Had Mr. Pierce, whose umbrella bore a suspicious stain, ventured forth despite his assertion? But if so, why return the umbrella to the lobby stand? Because perhaps he had never taken it upstairs at all, or because he wished it seen, publicly, innocently, among others. I descended once more to the lobby. The umbrella stand contained 6 umbrellas. 3 bore no tags. 1 belonged to a Mrs. Vaughan, elderly and infirm. Another to a traveling salesman who had departed at noon. Only Mr. Pierce's remained with a brass tag, an object both conspicuous and reassuring. I requested to examine the register. Mr. Talbot had checked in earlier that afternoon, his occupation listed simply as consultant. No further detail. Mr. Pierce had arrived the previous afternoon. 2 men arriving within hours of one another. Coincidence, perhaps, or perhaps design. As I stood reflecting, a voice behind me spoke with quiet urgency. You are investigating Mr. Talbot's death. I turned. The speaker was a young woman, perhaps 25, dressed in modest grey. Her eyes were dark and resolute. And you are? My name is Clara Whitmore. I was to meet Mr. Talbot today. For what purpose? She hesitated. He possessed information that could ruin a man. Which man? Her gaze shifted briefly toward the staircase leading to the upper floors. Mr. Leonard Pierce. Ah. The pieces began to align, not yet forming a picture, but hinting at its outline. And what was the nature of this information? I asked gently. A will, she replied. A revised will. Mr. Talbot served as intermediary for my late uncle. The document altered certain inheritances. Mr. Pierce stands to lose a considerable sum, should it be authenticated. How considerable? Nearly £50,000. A motive, then, of substantial weight. Did Mr. Talbot inform Mr. Pierce of this revision? I believe so. He intended to. And today you were to receive the document. Yes. At 3 o'clock. The time of death. Did Mr. Talbot fear for his safety? She drew a slow breath. He told me only that he felt watched. Watched. The word lingered. Thank you, Miss Whitmore. You have been most helpful. She inclined her head and withdrew. I remained still. Mr. Leonard Pierce, who had not left the hotel, Mr. Talbot, found dead in a locked room, a ledge connecting their windows, an umbrella bearing a dark stain, a fortune imperiled. The elements suggested a straightforward narrative. Yet I felt its simplicity too keenly. It lay upon the surface like polished glass, reflective, perhaps deceptive. In matters of murder, one must ask not merely who benefits, but who wishes us to believe they benefit. I returned to room 22 and examined the dispatch case more thoroughly. The papers within appeared orderly, too orderly. I searched among them for the revised will described by Miss Whitmore. It was not there. Instead, I found a blank envelope addressed to her in Mr. Talbot's hand. Blank. I examined the fireplace. Cold, no ashes. The wastebasket, empty. I straightened slowly. If the will had existed, it had vanished. If Mr. Pierce had killed to prevent its delivery, he would have ensured its destruction. Yet, where was the weapon? And how had he secured the door from within? I knelt beside the body and studied the wound, clean, precise. The angle slightly upward. A thrust delivered at close range by someone of similar height. Not a wild struggle. An encounter controlled. I rose and walked once more to the window. Upon the sill lay a minute fragment of thread, dark wool. He compared it in memory to Mr. Pierce's attire. He wore a dark wool coat, but so did half the gentlemen in the hotel. No, no one must not leap. The guest who never left. Such a phrase carries irony, for sometimes a man may leave not by corridor or staircase, but by a path few consider. And sometimes he may never leave at all, because he was never truly absent. The clock in the lobby struck 5. Soon the police would arrive, bringing with them official procedure and inevitable conclusions. I smoothed my moustache thoughtfully. There are crimes that shout their solution. This one whispered, and in that whisper, I detected something more troubling than guilt alone, a calculation extending beyond the death of one man. Mr. Leonard Pierce claimed he had not left the hotel since breakfast. Perhaps he spoke the truth. Perhaps he had not left at all. But if he had not left, then how had the umbrella acquired its stain? And why did the narrow stone ledge bear marks not of one journey, but of two? I allowed myself a small, reflective smile. The guest who never left. Yes. But the question remains, who returned? Chapter 3. Mud that did not belong. The mud upon the ferrule was not the pale dust of the hotel's courtyard, nor the grey soot of the avenue. It was red-brown clay, thick and adhesive, the sort that clings with obstinacy to leather soles and carriage wheels alike. I had walked there once, during a previous inquiry, and remembered distinctly the earth's particular stubbornness. It dries darker than most soils and leaves behind a faint mineral sheen, almost as though it resents its separation from the river that formed it. No such soil lay within blocks of the Grand Meridian. Therefore, the umbrella had indeed visited the riverside. Whether its master accompanied it, that was another question. I requested from the concierge a small penknife and, with delicate care, removed a fragment of the dried clay from the ferrule. It flaked reluctantly, revealing beneath it the bright steel tip, polished and precise. I held the fragment to the light. Even in its hardened state, one could discern its density and faint reddish cast. "Is something amiss, sir?" asked the concierge, who observed my actions with growing unease. "On the contrary," I replied. "Something is exceedingly present." He did not understand. That was as it should be. The riverside lay nearly a mile distant, beyond the railway arches where the trains thundered overhead, and the air bore the mingled scents of iron and water. It was not a place frequented by guests of the Grand Meridian. There were warehouses, a narrow quay, and a stretch of undeveloped bank where the clay, exposed by construction, clung treacherously to any who ventured near. Why should an umbrella belonging to Mr. Leonard Pierce, who claimed not to have left the hotel since his arrival, carry mud from so particular a place? I returned to my seat in the lobby and allowed the question to mature. At 4:30, Mr. Pierce descended from the staircase. He wore a dark coat of fine wool and carried himself with unruffled composure. He paused near the umbrella stand, as though verifying the continued presence of his property, and then turned toward the writing desk near the window. He seated himself and began composing a letter. The gesture was unremarkable, yet I observed the method with which he wrote. Deliberate, measured strokes, pauses of reflection, the occasional tightening of the jaw. A man accustomed to careful wording. After several minutes, he folded the paper, sealed it, and addressed the envelope. When he rose to deposit it at the concierge's desk for posting, I intercepted him. "Mr. Pierce," I said pleasantly, "may I detain you a moment?" He inclined his head. "If you must. I have been reflecting upon the clay upon your umbrella. I am flattered that it merits such contemplation. It is a distinctive clay." He regarded me steadily. "So I am told. You have, perhaps, visited the riverbank beyond the railway arches." The denial came without hesitation. "Never. I do not believe I have reason to frequent such a place." "Ah, and yet the clay is unmistakable." He folded his hands behind his back. "You speak with certainty. I prefer certainty to speculation." "And what does your certainty imply?" "That your umbrella has been where you claim you have not." He considered this. "Umbrellas may be borrowed, without the knowledge of their owners." "It is possible. By whom?" A faint smile touched his lips. "If I knew, I should inform you. Did you meet him today?" He paused. "Briefly, in the lobby. Did you go to his room? Number?" "You are aware, I assume, that he was found dead there this afternoon." A shadow passed across his features. Not shock, but something closer to calculation. "I had heard," he said quietly. "And you are not troubled?" "Of course I am troubled. A man has died, but not surprised." His gaze sharpened. "What do you suggest, Mr. Poirot?" "I suggest nothing, I observe." A silence followed. At last he said, "If you intend to accuse me, you should do so plainly." "My dear sir," I replied gently, "I accuse no one without the support of facts at present. I possess only mud, and mud is insufficient. On its own." "Yes." He inclined his head slightly. "Then we are agreed." He moved away, leaving behind an impression of composure so complete that it might have been rehearsed. I watched him ascend the staircase, the riverbank, the clay. The denial. There are lies that tremble and lies that stand upright, polished and immaculate. The latter are infinitely more dangerous. I resolved to verify my recollection. An hour later, with the pretext of a walk before dinner, I left the Grand Meridian and proceeded toward the railway arches. The air remained dry. The sun. Chapter 4. The scent of tobacco when I lifted the umbrella once more to inspect the fabric beneath the lobby lamps. A delicate aroma greeted me. It was subtle, almost shy, yet unmistakable. Not the coarse scent of common cigarettes, acrid and impatient, but the fuller fragrance of pipe tobacco, dark, spiced and faintly sweet, with an undertone reminiscent of dried fruit and cedar wood. It was a cultivated scent. I closed my eyes briefly and allowed memory to assist observation. Earlier that afternoon, while seated in the lounge adjoining the lobby, I had detected a similar fragrance drifting through the air. It had emanated from the corner where Mr. Leonard Pierce sat reading, his posture erect, a briar pipe resting between his fingers. He had smoked with restraint, no hurried puffing, no clouds of ostentation, merely the steady, contemplative rhythm of a man who regards tobacco as an ally in thought. Mr. Pierce was known, it seemed, as a pipe smoker of refined tastes. Yet now, as I brought the curved handle of the umbrella closer to my senses, the scent clung more strongly to the polished wood than it had to his coat when I had stood beside him in conversation. This, too, was an anomaly. Tobacco leaves its signature upon fabric gradually, through hours of exposure. Upon wood, however, particularly polished wood, it lingers only when the contact is recent and direct. Fingers steeped in smoke must have grasped the handle firmly and not long ago. The water upon the silk canopy had not yet fully evaporated when first I observed it. The journey had been brief. Someone had taken the umbrella out and returned it swiftly. The question, as ever, was not merely who, but why. I seated myself once more in the lounge, positioning my chair so that I might observe without intruding. The evening lamps had been lit. Their soft glow cast elongated shadows across the carpet. A small fire burned in the grate, though the air required no warmth. It was a gesture of hospitality, not necessity. Mr. Pierce sat where he had earlier, a fresh bowl of tobacco now smouldering in his pipe. The faint spiral of smoke rose and dissolved into the air. He turned a page of his newspaper with measured composure. I approached him. "Good evening, Mr. Pierce." He glanced up. "Mr. Poirot, you persist. In small matters, yes, it is a habit difficult to abandon." He gestured to the chair opposite. "Will you join me?" "Thank you." I sat. "You are fond of fine tobacco," I observed. He smiled slightly. "One must cultivate some pleasures. The blend is distinctive. A mixture I procure from a specialist in the north, not easily found here. Exclusive, if you like." I leaned back, allowing the scent to reach me more clearly. It was identical to that upon the umbrella handle. "You have smoked this afternoon?" I asked. "You did not, perhaps, step outside with it?" He shook his head. "There has been no need, no desire for fresh air. I find the interior air quite satisfactory." "Indeed." He regarded me with steady patience. "You are circling something, Mr. Poirot. I prefer the term approaching, then approach directly." "Very well. Your umbrella bears the scent of your tobacco more strongly than your coat does." His eyes did not waver. "It is my umbrella, yes, but the intensity suggests it has been handled recently, after you had smoked. And that proves that it was grasped firmly by someone whose fingers carried the fragrance. You imply that I took it out. I imply that it was taken out." He removed the pipe from his mouth and tapped it gently against the ashtray. "This is becoming tiresome. On the contrary, it is becoming interesting." A silence stretched between us, thin but unbroken. At length he said, "You are constructing a narrative. I advise caution. And I advise honesty." His lips curved faintly. "Honesty is often a matter of perspective, not in matters of clay and scent." He rose, extinguishing his pipe with deliberate care. "I have nothing further to add." He departed without haste. Left alone, I reflected upon the implications. The umbrella had visited the riverbank. Its handle bore the fresh scent of Mr. Pierce's tobacco. The water upon its silk had been recent when first observed. Yet Mr. Pierce denied having left the hotel. If he spoke falsely, then his motive must be examined. If he spoke truthfully, then someone had borrowed his umbrella, after he had handled it and returned it swiftly. But who within the Grand Meridian had both opportunity and reason? I summoned the concierge. "Has anyone besides Mr. Pierce been near the umbrella stand today?" He considered. "Guests pass by frequently." "Specifically, did Mr. Talbot approach it?" The concierge frowned slightly. "I believe he did pause there shortly after arriving. He seemed to be examining the umbrellas." "Did he take one?" "I cannot say. I was occupied with another guest." "Did he carry an umbrella when he entered the hotel?" "No, sir." "Did he leave the hotel again before his death?" "To my knowledge, no." "Knowledge," I murmured, "is a fragile thing." The concierge shifted uneasily. "Are you suggesting—" "I suggest nothing yet." I ascended once more to the second floor. Outside room 22, the constable remained at his post. I requested permission to re-examine the deceased's effects. Within the room, the air felt heavier, as though the walls themselves retained the memory of violence. I approached the writing desk. Among the items catalogued lay a small leather tobacco pouch. I opened it, empty, not entirely. There remained a faint residue of tobacco dust. I brought it closer to my senses. It was not the same blend as Mr. Pierce's. This was lighter, sharper, less complex. Mr. Talbot, then, was not a pipe smoker of the same refinement. I turned my attention to the washstand. There, upon the porcelain basin, I detected a faint ring, reddish-brown in color. Not water alone, but water mingled with earth. Someone had washed mud from their hands. The residue, the clink of porcelain, and the murmur of subdued conversation formed a pleasant background. Yet beneath it, one could sense the invisible tension that now lingered within the grand meridian, like a draught that slips beneath closed doors. After a few moments, I inclined my head courteously. "Miss Whitmore, I believe." She turned toward me, startled. Her eyes were gray and luminous, though shadowed by fatigue. "Yes, Hercule Poirot." Recognition flickered across her face. "The detective. At your service, though I prefer the term observer." She managed a faint smile. "You are observing me. Only your gloves." She glanced down instinctively. The tremor ceased for an instant, then resumed. "They are a foolish color," she said quietly. "On the contrary, they are memorable. I did not intend to be memorable. Few of us do." A silence followed, not uncomfortable, but weighted. "You are troubled," I said gently. Her gaze shifted again toward the door. "There has been unpleasantness." "Yes, you know of Mr. Talbot?" "I do." Her lips tightened. "It is dreadful and unexpected." She hesitated. "Perhaps not entirely." "Ah." The tremor in her hands deepened slightly. "Miss Whitmore," I continued, "may I ask, were you acquainted with Mr. Talbot?" "Only indirectly." "Through Mr. Leonard Pierce." At the mention of that name, her composure faltered. "I know Mr. Pierce," she said. "In what capacity?" "He was my fiancé's business partner." "Your fiancé?" Her voice softened. "Henry Whitmore. We were to be married in the autumn, and Mr. Whitmore is dead." The word emerged with controlled precision. "I am sorry," I said quietly. "They called it an accident. He fell near the riverbank beyond the railway arches. He was found in the water." The riverbank, the clay, the arches beneath which the trains thundered indifferently overhead. "When did this occur?" I asked. 3 weeks ago, and the circumstances were clear. They were declared clear. Declared by whom? The police. There were no witnesses. Did Mr. Pierce accept this conclusion? She gave a small, brittle laugh. He accepted it readily. And you? I did not. Her fingers tightened against the fabric of her dress. The blue gloves trembled more visibly now. Henry was careful, she continued. He disliked the river. He had no reason to walk there alone. And yet he did. So they say, you believe otherwise? She looked at me steadily. I believe Henry was meeting someone, Mr. Pierce. Her silence answered more eloquently than words. Were their business affairs strained, as you suggested? Yes. In what manner? There were disagreements over investments. Henry had begun to question certain transactions. He felt excluded. Excluded from his own enterprise. Yes. And he confided this to you? He confided everything to me. The tremor subsided briefly as resolve replaced agitation. And Mr. Talbot? I asked. Where does he enter this narrative? She drew a measured breath. Mr. Talbot was an intermediary. He possessed documents, copies of contracts, financial statements. He hinted to me that irregularities might be proven. Irregularities implicating Mr. Pierce. Yes. And he intended to share these documents with you. He had promised to. Today, at 3 o'clock. The hour of death, when you learned of Mr. Talbot's demise. I asked gently. What did you think? Her gaze fell to her lap. That Henry would never receive justice. The simplicity of the statement lent it gravity. I allowed a pause. Miss Whitmore, I said. Earlier, I mentioned the clay from the riverbank. You seemed disturbed. Her eyes rose sharply. Clay, yes, the distinctive red, brown earth found only beyond the railway arches. Her composure faltered. "You have been there?" she asked. "Recently?" She swallowed. "And I found footprints, more than one set." Her gloved fingers tightened further. "Did Mr. Talbot meet someone there today?" I asked softly. "I do not know." "But you suspect?" She hesitated. "Miss Whitmore," I continued, "a secret often trembles before it breaks." The tremor in her hands became unmistakable. "I received a note," she said at last. "From whom?" "From Mr. Talbot." "When?" "This morning." "What did it say?" "That he had arranged a meeting at the riverbank. That matters would soon be settled." "Did he specify with whom he was to meet?" "Number, but you inferred." "Yes." "Did you go to the riverbank yourself?" A pause. "Yes." "At what time?" "Shortly after noon." "And what did you observe?" "Nothing at first. I arrived early. I waited." "For how long?" "Perhaps 20 minutes. And then I saw 2 men near the jetty." "Could you identify them?" "From a distance, yes." "Who were they?" She closed her eyes briefly. "Henry's partner," she whispered. "Mr. Pierce and Mr. Talbot." "And what transpired?" They argued. "You heard their words." "Not distinctly, only fragments." "Did the argument become violent?" "I do not think so." They stood apart. There was tension, but no struggle. And then I left. "You left before they parted?" "Yes." "Why?" Her voice wavered. "I was afraid." "Afraid of what?" "Of what might be revealed." I regarded her steadily. "When you returned to the hotel, did you see Mr. Pierce?" "Yes." "Did he appear disordered? Mud upon his shoes, perhaps?" I did not look. "Did he carry an umbrella?" Her eyes widened slightly. I believe so." "Are you certain?" "Number, I was not attending. But you recall something?" "Yes, the umbrella." "What of it?" "It was black, distinctive, with a silver handle." "I think so." "And when you returned later to the lounge, was it in the stand?" "Yes." "Untouched, visible, unhidden." "Miss Whitmore," I said quietly, "did you speak of this meeting to anyone?" "Number, why not?" "Because if Henry had died for the truth, I did not wish to endanger another. And yet Mr. Talbot is dead." The words hung heavily between us. She removed one glove and pressed her bare hand against her temple. "I never imagined," she began, and did not finish. When I left her, I walked slowly toward the umbrella stand once more. The pattern deepened. 3 weeks ago, Henry Whitmore had perished near the riverbank. An accident, they said. His business partner, Leonard Pierce. Today, at that same riverbank, Mr. Pierce and Mr. Talbot met in private. Shortly thereafter, Talbot lay dead. The umbrella had carried Clay from that place and returned swiftly. Miss Whitmore had witnessed the meeting, though not its conclusion. Her gloves had trembled because she feared the past repeating itself. 2 deaths linked by the same patch of earth. The scent of tobacco, the swift journey, the denial. Yet still the locked room defied simplicity. If Mr. Pierce had confronted Talbot at the riverbank, why pursue him to the hotel? Unless the meeting had not resolved what it intended to resolve. Unless something, some document, remained in Talbot's possession. Or unless the true purpose of the riverside meeting was not negotiation, but arrangement. I glanced toward the staircase. Mr. Leonard Pierce remained unseen. In the lounge, Miss Whitmore replaced her blue glove with deliberate care. The tremor persisted, though more subdued. A secret often trembles before it breaks. But sometimes it does not break at all. Sometimes it is broken for the sake of silence. The clay upon the umbrella spoke of a meeting. The tobacco spoke of recent touch. And the lady in blue gloves spoke, without meaning to, of history repeating itself by the river. The storm had begun there once before. It seemed determined to return. Chapter 6. Borrowed exits, the concierge insisted. insisted with the wounded certainty of a man whose entire existence is built upon lists and ledgers, that no one had requested a carriage, nor called for a taxi that afternoon. The assertion was delivered not merely as information but as defense. Defense of his discipline, his vigilance, and perhaps of the hotel itself. In establishments like the Grand Meridian, order is not simply a preference. It is an article of faith. Any disruption is treated as a personal affront. He produced the transportation book at once, opening it with reverent care upon the marble counter. Each page was ruled, each entry neat. Times were recorded in a steady hand. Names marched obediently down the columns. There were receipts clipped at the margins, folded notes from drivers, tiny evidences of a system designed to leave nothing to chance. "You see, sir," he said, running a finger down the day's page. "We have at 11:15 Mr. Hargreaves to the station. At 12:40, a hired motor for Mrs. Clandon to the dressmaker's. At 1:20, the doctor's carriage for the lady in room 9. But at noon, nothing. Not one request, not one call. It is impossible that a guest left the hotel by conveyance without my knowledge." I listened politely, though my attention had already moved beyond the book. "I have found that the proud will always direct you toward what they believe is their strongest proof. It is a useful habit. One learns not only what they know, but also what they refuse to consider." "You are very thorough," I said. His chest expanded slightly, as though he had been complimented on moral virtue rather than clerical precision. "One must be in our line. And the doorman?" I asked. He noted no departures of interest. "None, sir." I questioned him myself. "No one left the main entrance between 11:30 and 12:30 except 2 gentlemen who went to the tobacconist and returned within 15 minutes. They wore no umbrellas, and their coats were dry." "Ah," I murmured, "the main entrance." The concierge blinked, naturally. "It is the only entrance for guests." I regarded him with a mild expression that encourages truth to emerge without force. "The only entrance," I repeated gently. "That is grand." His face tightened in faint irritation. "Sir, hotels," I said, "are like respectable households. They have drawing rooms and kitchens. They have front doors and back doors. They have entrances meant for ceremony and others meant for necessity." He hesitated, and I could see in his eyes the moment when he recognized what he had not wished to recognize. "The side entrance," he said at last, reluctantly, as though the words tasted of dust. "Yes," I agreed, "the side entrance. It lay beyond the service corridor, past the kitchens where steam and clatter disguised footsteps, past the linen closet where carts were pushed without question, past the discreet door marked for staff. It opened into a narrow alley that ran behind the hotel, like a seam in a well-tailored coat. Present, useful, and rarely admired. "That door is for employees," he said quickly. "Not for guests. Is it locked?" "Not during the day. It would impede deliveries." "And at noon today?" I asked. "Was it supervised?" He colored slightly, his pride struggling with reality. "At noon there is movement. The kitchen is busy. The porter assists at the front. It may have been unattended briefly." "How long is briefly?" I asked. He took a breath. "Perhaps 10 minutes, at most." 10 minutes. It is astonishing what can be done in 10 minutes, if one has planned it in advance. A letter can be stolen. A room can be entered and left. A weapon can be disposed of, and a man can walk out through an unobserved door without any polite record being made. "Thank you," I said, closing the ledger gently, as though it were a prayer book. "You have been most helpful." He looked uncertain. "Helpful, but I have told you that no one left." "You have told me," I replied, "that no one left in the manner that would have pleased the book." I left him frowning after me and made my way toward the service corridor. The passage was narrow, tiled in pale squares, and smelled of soap, starch, and something faintly metallic from the kitchen pans. A maid hurried past with folded sheets. A boy with a tray of cups sidestepped me, his eyes downcast. I observed their movements, the quick, unquestioning efficiency of those who belong to the hidden machinery of comfort. At the far end of the corridor, the side door stood slightly ajar, Light cut through the opening in a thin blade. A draft carried the faint smell of dust and sun, warmed brick. I pushed it open and stepped outside. The alley behind the Grand Meridian was not unpleasant, merely uncelebrated. It held stacked crates, a row of refuse bins tidied with excessive zeal, a drain pipe, and the back wall of the hotel rising above like a stern guardian. The ground was dry as everything in the city center had been all day. There were no puddles, no darkened stones, no dampness, only dust and the pale grit of long neglect. And yet the umbrella I had observed in the lobby had been wet. That contradiction sat at the heart of my thoughts, like a pebble in the shoe, small, but impossible to ignore. I walked the alley's length, noting where it met a narrow street that led, with increasing ugliness, toward the railway arches. The route was straightforward. One could traverse it briskly, unnoticed among tradesmen and clerks. The Grand Meridian's guests in their polished shoes seldom wandered here. But seldom is not never. As I walked, I turned over in my mind the strange, precise nature of the day's weather. It had been, to all appearances, a day so dry that rain itself seemed indecent. Yet the umbrella had carried recent water, and the clay upon its ferrule had been moist when I first observed it. Moisture does not maintain itself indefinitely. It is the most impatient of witnesses. It evaporates. It disappears. It changes shape. Therefore, if the umbrella had returned wet, the journey had not occurred in the distant morning. It had occurred not long before, but from where could it return wet when the hotel and its neighborhood were dry? There are times when men lie with confidence and objects tell the truth without effort. Earlier in the evening I had requested, quietly, the daily meteorological bulletin posted near reception. Hotels, catering to travelers, make such information available in a manner intended to be helpful rather than interesting. A small printed sheet, pinned neatly to a board, noting temperatures, wind, and expected conditions. Yet this day's bulletin contained one line that made my thoughts sharpen. It stated that a narrow band of rain had passed along the riverside quarter, beyond the railway arches between 11:30 and 12:15. The city center had remained untouched, a peculiar weather pattern recorded precisely. I confess, I felt a moment of admiration for nature's timing. When men commit crimes, they prefer the darkness, the fog, the confusion. They do not like the clarity of a timestamp. But here was the rain, brief, localized, and exact. It had made a mark where it fell and nowhere else. An umbrella carried to the riverbank at noon would return wet, though the sky above the Grand Meridian remained blue. That was no longer speculation. It was mathematics. I followed the route myself, not for exercise but for comprehension. The city's elegance thinned as I approached the arches. Here the buildings became utilitarian, the streets narrowed. The air took on a faint tang of soot and iron. The railway, elevated and relentless, dominated the horizon. Under the arches, the sound changed. The roar of trains above swallowed conversation. Each passing carriage of steel created a brief storm of noise, then a lull, then another. It was the perfect place for a meeting that wished to remain private. Even if two men raised their voices, no one at a distance would hear anything beyond the iron thunder overhead. Beyond the arches, the footpath descended toward the river, and there the clay lay exposed. Red, brown, thick, adhesive, the sort that clings to one's soul like a stubborn memory. It was precisely the clay I had remembered. Precisely the clay that did not belong within blocks of the Grand Meridian. The day's brief rain had darkened it and softened its surface. But now, hours later, it was drying again, darkening to that particular tone that leaves a faint mineral sheen. I knelt and pressed my finger lightly into it. The impression remained clean. It was still slightly yielding beneath the surface crust. Footprints were present, though softened and overlapping. Several sets not arranged in an orderly sequence, but scattered like the remains of a brief negotiation. Approach, turn, pause, retreat. Near the small jetty, I saw again the circular indentation consistent with the ferrule of an umbrella pressed firmly into the softened earth. I examined it more carefully this time. The mark had a slight ring, as though the tip had been twisted or shifted while pressed down, an impatient gesture, perhaps made by someone waiting beside it. The prince suggested two men standing close and then separating. One set of footsteps departed toward the arches with a more decisive stride. Another lingered nearer the water for a moment, the prince deeper, as though weight had shifted or a thought had delayed movement. The rain had not destroyed these signs, it had preserved them. Without the rain, the clay might have been too dry to record the ferrule's imprint so clearly. Without the rain, the umbrella might have returned dry and ordinary. Nature had unwillingly assisted justice. I stood and looked along the river, its surface sluggish and indifferent. A coil of rope lay beside a crate, a line of reeds bent at the water's edge. It was not a romantic place. It was a practical place, made for labor, for quiet transactions, for meetings that prefer no witnesses. I imagined the scene at noon. Two men arrive separately. One perhaps from the station, one perhaps from the city. A localized shower begins brief, narrow, almost theatrical. One man raises an umbrella. Words are exchanged, papers perhaps are shown. A sentence is spoken that cannot be taken back. Then the rain ends, the men separate. One returns to the city center, carrying the damp umbrella and the clay upon its ferrule. He slips back into the hotel, not through the revolving door that sighs politely under the doorman's eye, but through the side entrance, where steam from the kitchen and the bustle of servants make a perfect veil. He places the umbrella into the brass, stand in the lobby as though it had never left. An umbrella can leave without its owner. Yes, but it may also return bearing news. And the news was not merely that it had rained by the river. The news was that someone had taken the trouble to go there at precisely the time the bulletin recorded. Someone who either desired secrecy or desired to create the appearance of secrecy. Someone who expected the umbrella's dampness to be noticed. When I returned to the Grand Meridian, the lobby wore its evening calm like an expensive garment. Lamps glowed. The polished floor reflected their warmth. Guests murmured over tea and newspapers, as though murder were an unpleasant rumor belonging to another building. But I knew how easily calm can be staged. I went at once to the concierge. "Has anyone used the side door again this evening?" I asked. He stiffened. "I have instructed the porter to observe it." "Since what time?" "Since 6. And before 6. He hesitated, then said, "I cannot say." "Very good," I replied. Uncertainty is often more honest than pride. I asked next for the times at which the kitchen staff took their luncheon, for I wished to reconstruct the small window when the side door was unobserved. The concierge's answers were vague. No one likes to admit gaps in routine. Yet from the fragments I gathered, the period between 11:50 and 12:10 offered precisely the kind of opportunity a careful person would exploit. I then requested to speak with Mr. Pierce once more. He received me in his room with that smooth civility which I now found increasingly unhelpful. The room itself was as immaculate as his manner. Bed made precisely, papers stacked neatly, his pipe arranged beside an ashtray, as though it had been placed there by a ruler. "Mr. Poirot," he said, "you are persistent." "I am methodical," I replied. He gestured to a chair. I sat. "I have walked," I said, "from the hotel's side door to the railway arches. It takes 10 minutes at a brisk pace." His expression remained neutral. "I have walked from the arches to the riverbank," I continued. "That takes 5 minutes more." Still he said nothing. "At the riverbank," I went on, "there is red, brown clay, the kind that clings and dries dark and leaves a faint mineral sheen. And?" he asked, voice calm. "And the weather bulletin records rain there between 11:30 and 12:15. He made a small motion of his hand, as though dismissing a triviality. "Weather is weather. Precisely, and it is impartial. It tells the truth without desire." I leaned forward slightly. "An umbrella carried there at noon would return wet," I said. "It would return wet even if the city center were dry, even if the sky above the Grand Meridian were blue." He held my gaze. "And your umbrella returned wet," I concluded. A silence followed, clean and sharp. "You wish me to confess," he said at last. "I wish you to explain," I replied. I have explained. I did not leave the hotel. The main entrance ledger agrees, I said. But the side entrance keeps no book. His eyes narrowed a fraction. So you have discovered the servant's door. I have discovered an unobserved door. He stood and moved to the window. He did not look at the square. He looked at the reflection in the glass, as though he preferred to address his own image. Suppose, he said slowly, that I had left by that door. Suppose I had gone to the Riverside Quarter. Suppose I had met Mr. Talbot privately to discuss a document. Does that make me a murderer? No, I replied. It makes you a liar. He turned sharply. You are quick to insult. I am quick to name what exists. He returned to the chair opposite me and sat, hands clasped. The composure remained, but something in it had tightened, like a knot pulled too firmly. You have been speaking with Miss Whitmore, he said. I have spoken with her, yes, and she told you about Henry Whitmore's death, yes. And now you will weave that into your story as well. I will weave only what is true, I said, and truth is not woven, it is uncovered. He smiled faintly without warmth. You speak as if truth is a single object. In my experience, it is. And what object is that? A motive. His expression hardened. Ah, Mr. Pierce, I said. Why meet Mr. Talbot at the riverbank? I have not admitted I did, he replied. Then I will phrase it differently, I said. Why would any man meet Mr. Talbot at the riverbank rather than in a hotel lounge? He paused. Privacy. Privacy from whom? From others. From Miss Whitmore. A flicker, so small it might have been imagined, passed behind his eyes. You are impertinent, he said quietly. I am exact. He rose again, paced once, then stopped. Mr. Talbot was a meddler. And yet you spoke with him yesterday, I said. And he spoke with you today. That proves nothing. It proves contact, I replied. And contact matters when the contact ends in death. He returned to his seat. Very well, he said. Yes, I met him. A confession of proximity, not of murder. At what time? I asked. Near noon. Did you take your umbrella? Yes, because of the rain. I had heard there might be showers, and after the meeting you returned to the hotel. Yes. Through which entrance? He hesitated. The side entrance. Why? He spread his hands slightly. I disliked the idea of being observed. Observed by whom? The doorman, other guests. I prefer discretion. Discretion, I repeated, a respectable word. His gaze sharpened. You make it sound like a crime. It is not, I said, unless one uses it to hide a crime. He held my gaze for a long moment. I did not kill Mr. Talbot, he said. I did not ask you that, I replied. The silence that followed was thicker. Tell me about the meeting, I said at last. It concerned documents, he replied carefully. Papers Mr. Talbot claimed to possess. He wished to extract something from me. Money? Not exactly. Then what? A concession, he said. An admission. And did you give it? Numbered. Did he threaten you? He implied consequences. Consequences involving Miss Whitmore? I asked. He did not answer. Consequences involving Henry Whitmore's death? I pressed. His jaw tightened. Henry's death was an accident. You say so, I replied. And yet the riverbank seems to collect accidents around you like clay. His eyes flashed with sudden anger, then cooled again into control. You are not a judge, he said. No, I agreed. I am only the little man who notices where the mud does not belong. I rose. One more question, I said. When you returned to the hotel and placed the umbrella in the stand, did you handle it? Of course, with hands that had held your pipe. He hesitated, and in that hesitation the scent of tobacco returned to my mind. Yes, he said reluctantly. I had smoked earlier. I inclined my head. Thank you. I left him then, not because I had extracted all I wished, but because I had extracted what mattered, the confirmation that the umbrella's journey had been real, and that it had been undertaken by its owner, that narrowed the field. It did not solve the locked room, but it gave the locked room a direction. Back in the lobby, the umbrella stood in the brass stand, quiet and ordinary under the lamplight. The guests passed it without interest. In its dry silk there was no longer any hint of rain. In its ferrule only a faint stain remained. Yet to me it was no longer merely an object. It was the record of a hidden movement. Borrowed exits leave no signatures in ledgers. They create no official trace. They are invisible to the system. That is why criminals love them. It is why blackmailers love them. It is why men who do not wish to be seen love them. The side door of the Grand Meridian was such an exit, borrowed from the servants, borrowed from routine, borrowed from the hotel's belief in order. And there is something profoundly instructive in that. The Grand Meridian prides itself on its front, its revolving door, its marble, its polite greetings, its book of names. It believes that what matters passes through the public eye. Yet the day's most consequential journey had not passed through that eye at all. It had slipped through the back. I stood for a moment watching the revolving door turn, admitting a late guest in a light coat. The door sighed, performed its elegant rotation, and closed again. The doorman smiled, lifted his hat, returned to his post. Order restored. Appearances intact, but behind, in the service corridor, the side door waited, quiet, unglamorous, and profoundly available. An umbrella can leave without its owner. Yes, but this one had not. It had left with Mr. Pierce. It had returned with him. It had carried the rain from a narrow band along the river into the dry, polished heart of the hotel. It had carried the clay that did not belong. It had carried the scent of tobacco on its handle like a signature. And it had carried something else too, something not visible, not measurable, but deeply real. It had carried the knowledge that Mr. Pierce had lied earlier, and that he had revised his lie only when he realized nature itself contradicted him. A man who lies about leaving a hotel at noon may lie about greater things at 3 o'clock. That thought was not proof. It was, however, a path, like the railway footpath under the arches, leading toward the truth. I turned away at last, my mind already moving ahead to what must come next. The reconstruction of the afternoon, the locked door, the missing weapon, and the vanished document that had driven men to secret meetings by the river. The umbrella had returned bearing news, and the news was clear. Somebody had chosen secrecy over simplicity, and in doing so, had left behind the kind of trace that no ledger can record. Only the attentive mind can read. Chapter 7. The timetable of the stand. There are moments in an investigation when the grand gestures, accusations, letters, motives must be set aside in favor of something quieter. I have often said that I prefer order to chaos, symmetry to confusion. It is not merely aesthetic, it is practical. Disorder hides, symmetry reveals. The umbrella stand in the lobby of the Grand Meridian was, to the casual eye, an ornament of brass and utility. To me, it became a timetable. One must treat such objects as one treats a railway schedule, not as decoration, but as record. At breakfast, it held 6 umbrellas. I knew this because I had been seated in the lobby at 8:30, reading and observing. The morning had been dry and clear. The stand contained 6 distinct shapes, 2 brown, 1 striped, 1 tartan, 1 slim grey, and 1 black silk with a curved silver handle. I remember them clearly, for symmetry pleases me, and I count such things without effort. 6 by luncheon, however, there were 7. The addition had not been dramatic. A dark green umbrella with a hooked wooden handle had appeared among the others, belonging to a commercial traveler newly arrived from the north. The concierge had received him, the porter had taken his case, and the umbrella had been placed carefully into the stand. 7 by tea, once more 6. Then, shortly thereafter, 7 again. Such small fluctuations might escape any reasonable mind. Yet I do not aim to be reasonable, I aim to be exact. When I first noticed the inconsistency, I did not leap to conclusions. I approached the stand as though examining an exhibit in a museum, circling it, counting discreetly, memorizing proportions. The brass rim bore faint scratches from years of use. The interior rings held the umbrellas upright like soldiers in parade formation. 6, then 7, then 6 again. I called the porter. He was a conscientious young man with an earnest expression and the habit of aligning objects unnecessarily. His devotion to symmetry bordered upon affection. "You adjust the umbrellas in the stand?" I asked. "Yes, sir. It looks untidy otherwise." "Untidy. If the handles point in different directions, I keep them aligned." "Ah," I said with satisfaction. "You value order." "Yes, sir." "Then you will have noticed if one were removed." He hesitated. "Possibly." "At breakfast," I continued. "How many were present?" He thought carefully. 6, I believe, and at luncheon, 7. The gentleman from Leeds brought one." "And before noon," I asked gently, "did you observe any change?" He frowned in concentration. "I remember adjusting them around 11, he said slowly. "There were 7 then." And shortly after, he shifted uneasily. "There were 6. For how long?" "I cannot say precisely. Not long." "Minutes?" "Yes, sir. Only minutes." "Which umbrella was absent?" He did not answer at once. His brow furrowed, and I could see the effort of recollection. "The black one," he said finally, "with the silver handle." "Mr. Pierce's," I said. "Yes, sir." "And when did it reappear?" "Before noon." "Certainly. I remember because I adjusted it again. It had been placed back slightly out of line." "Out of line?" "Yes, sir. The handle was turned differently from the others." "How differently?" He demonstrated with his hands. "The curve faced outward instead of inward." "An error you corrected?" "Immediately." I nodded. "The symmetry of objects betrays more than the memory of men. Men forget. They misremember. They exaggerate or diminish. But objects, when moved, create patterns. Patterns reveal interruption." "So the umbrella was absent briefly," I said. "Yes, sir. Long enough for a brisk walk." He looked uncertain. "I suppose so, to the railway arches and back." He stared at me, startled. "Sir?" "Answer simply." "Yes, sir. Did anyone ask you about the umbrella's absence? Number, did you think it strange?" I assumed the owner had taken it out and returned it swiftly. "Yes, sir." I dismissed him with thanks. I stood once more before the umbrella stand. The black silk canopy appeared entirely innocent. The silver handle reflected the lobby's lamplight. No trace of its excursion remained visible to the untrained eye. Yet, I saw the gap. I saw the moment when 6 became 7, when 7 became 6, and when 6 returned to 7 again. In my mind, I reconstructed the morning as one reconstructs a railway timetable. 8:36 umbrellas, 11 o'clock, 7 umbrellas, the arrival of the traveller. 11:56 umbrellas. Mr. Pierce's absent 12:05 umbrellas. Mr. Pierce's returned. Between 11:50 and 12:05, the side entrance unattended. Between 11:30 and 12:15, rain recorded along the riverbank. Between 12 o'clock and 12:10, clay soft enough to preserve footprints. The intervals aligned with disturbing precision. I sought out the concierge once more. "Did Mr. Pierce descend to the lobby before noon?" I asked. "He passed through at approximately 11:45, the concierge replied after consulting memory. "He carried no coat." "Did he carry an umbrella?" I did not observe. "Did you see him leave by the main entrance?" "Numbered. Did you see him return?" "Number." The omission hung in the air. "I remind you," he added defensively, "that the side entrance." "Yes," I said gently. "The side entrance. It is a peculiar thing, the comfort of symmetry. When all objects are aligned, the mind rests. When one object departs, even briefly, the harmony is disturbed." Mr. Pierce's umbrella had departed. Not for hours, not for a conspicuous duration, but for precisely long enough to walk to the river at a brisk pace, long enough to stand beneath the arch, long enough to confront a man holding a letter, long enough for rain to fall and clay to cling, Long enough for tension to mount, not long enough to arouse suspicion. That was the calculation. The brief absence would pass unnoticed, except by one who counted. The porter's memory, anchored in his love of alignment, supplied what no ledger recorded. The umbrella had been absent for a short interval before noon. Not missing long enough to create alarm, merely long enough to walk to the river and back. I requested an interview with Mr. Pierce once more. He received me with a composure now edged with impatience. "You have developed an interest in furniture," he said dryly. "Not furniture," I replied. "Schedules. I keep none. Your umbrella does." He folded his arms. "It was absent from the stand between 11:50 and 12:05, I said calmly. He did not respond. The porter remembers adjusting 6 umbrellas where there had been 7. Porters remember many things incorrectly. "He remembers symmetry," I replied. "He corrected your umbrella's misalignment when it returned." A faint tightening of his jaw betrayed irritation. "You have admitted meeting Mr. Talbot at the river," I continued. "You have admitted returning by the side entrance. Yes, you denied it first." I corrected myself. "Because nature corrected you." His eyes flashed. "What of it?" he demanded. "We met, we argued, we parted. And then you returned to the hotel and placed the umbrella in the stand. Yes, you believed no one would note its absence. Because it was trivial. To you," I said. "Not to me." Silence. "Mr. Pierce," I continued, "when Mr. Talbot later died in his room, did you expect that the umbrella's brief journey would connect you to him? Number did you imagine that the stand itself would become a witness?" He did not answer. I left him and returned once more to the lobby. The umbrella stand gleamed under lamplight. I considered the rhythm of the day. Breakfast. 6, luncheon. 7, before noon. 6, after noon. 7. It was almost musical. A repetition of notes. A subtle variation. A single object out of place is like a cracked note in a symphony. It demands attention. Earlier, I had noticed moisture, then clay, then scent. Now time. The timetable of the stand confirmed what the weather bulletin suggested, and the clay implied Mr. Pierce had ventured out before noon, under cover of a localized rain, to meet Mr. Talbot at the riverbank. He had returned swiftly, believing the excursion too brief to matter. He had placed the umbrella back among its companions, trusting that symmetry would restore innocence. But symmetry does not erase interruption, it highlights it. The porter's memory of alignment became as valuable as any witness statement. The umbrella had been absent long enough for confrontation, long enough for motive to sharpen, long enough for something to be decided. Whether that decision led directly to murder or merely set its stage remained to be proven. But of one fact I was now certain: the journey to the river had occurred. It had occurred at the precise hour when rain fell only there. It had been brief, it had been deliberate, and it had left behind not only clay and scent, but a gap in symmetry that no amount of composure could conceal. The timetable of the stand did not shout, it whispered, but I have always preferred whispers. They are, in the end, more truthful than cries. Chapter 8. The letter by the water. The discovery was not dramatic. No cry rang out, no crowd gathered. It was a railway laborer, methodical and incurious, who found the paper beneath the arch near the riverbank the following morning. It had lodged against a stone support, protected from the current, yet damp from the rain that had fallen in that narrow band along the water's edge. The laborer, noticing handwriting and a signature, brought it to the constable stationed nearby. From the constable it came, by predictable progression, into my hands. It was folded once, as though hastily thrust into a pocket and later discarded. The edges were irregular, torn rather than cut. The dampness had blurred certain lines, yet enough remained legible to make its significance unmistakable. At the bottom of the page stood the name, Leonard Pierce. Above it, in firm, unmistakable script, were sentences that chilled even my practiced composure. The letter detailed a financial arrangement, private, undisclosed and unauthorized. Funds belonging to Mr. Henry Whitmore had been diverted over several months into a separate account controlled solely by Mr. Pierce. The language was cautious, couched in terms of temporary transfers and strategic reallocations. But the implication was clear. Money had been siphoned from a partner without consent. There was no ambiguity in the signature. The dead man, Mr. Talbot, had evidently confronted Mr. Pierce with this document that morning. I read it twice. Then a third time. The phrasing suggested that the letter had not been written as a confession, but as a reluctant acknowledgement, perhaps extracted under pressure. It bore the tone of a man cornered, conceding in writing what he refused to concede aloud. Why then had it been found beneath the railway arch? Because it had not been meant to remain in anyone's possession. I returned at once to the riverbank. The clay had dried further since my last visit, but its impressions remained visible where the rain had once softened the surface. The ground beneath the arch showed disturbances more pronounced than I had previously noticed. Two sets of footprints overlapped in a pattern no longer suggestive of mere argument. There had been movement, a step backward, a pivot, a deeper indentation where weight had shifted abruptly. A struggle, not violent enough to tear the earth apart, but sufficient to disturb it in unmistakable ways. Near the base of the arch, I saw scuffed clay consistent with someone stumbling or bracing against the stone support. The letter had been found there. I reconstructed the sequence in my mind. Mr. Talbot, in possession of documentary proof of financial betrayal, arranges a private meeting with Mr. Pierce. He chooses the riverbank, isolated, masked by the thunder of trains overhead. He anticipates confrontation. Mr. Pierce arrives, perhaps expecting negotiation, perhaps prepared for it. The rain begins, brief, localized, fortuitous. Under the umbrella's canopy, the two men stand close enough to exchange words too dangerous for walls. Talbot produces the letter. Pierce recognizes his own signature. The demand is made, money returned, confession issued, perhaps legal consequences threatened. The ground shows signs of tension. Was there physical violence? The clay suggests resistance, but not necessarily fatal force. The rain, meanwhile, continues its narrow descent, darkening the soil, preserving the impressions. And then, something changes. The letter is torn. A portion is discarded, whether deliberately or in haste. Pierce departs with the umbrella, believing that the storm will wash away his footprints. It is an understandable assumption. Rain erases, rain blurs, rain forgives. Yet he forgets one small detail, the umbrella he carries. For while rain softens clay, it also marks objects exposed to it. The umbrella, returning to the dry precincts of the Grand Meridian, bore moisture inconsistent with the city's weather. It bore clay that did not belong. It bore the scent of the man who had handled it. In seeking concealment, he created contrast. I returned to the hotel and requested once more to see Mr. Pierce. He received me with diminished patience. "You persist beyond courtesy," he said. "I persist beyond comfort," I replied. I placed the damp letter upon his writing desk. He did not touch it at once. He looked at it as one looks at a mirror one does not wish to consult. "You recognize this?" I asked. He inhaled slowly. "It appears to bear my name. It bears your signature, Silence. The funds described here," I continued, "were transferred without your partner's knowledge. Temporary arrangements," he said evenly. "Without consent. Strategic. Unauthorized." He met my gaze sharply. "You are not an auditor. Number, I am concerned only with consequence." He picked up the letter at last. His fingers trembled almost imperceptibly, a departure from the composure he had maintained thus far. "This proves nothing about murder," he said. "No," I agreed. "It proves motive." His jaw tightened. "Henry Whitmore began to suspect irregularities," I continued. "He dies near this same riverbank. An accident, you say?" He said nothing. Mr. Talbot obtains documentary evidence and arranges a meeting under the railway arch. He confronts you with this letter. You assume much. I deduce from clay. His expression darkened. "After the meeting," I said quietly, "the letter is torn. A portion is discarded. You return to the hotel by the side entrance, believing the rain has erased the evidence of your presence." He rose abruptly. I did not kill Talbot, he said. You may not have killed him there, I replied. The distinction hung between us like a blade. He stared at me. You suggest, he said slowly, that the struggle by the river was not fatal. I suggest that Mr. Talbot left the riverbank alive, and later died in his room. He finished. Yes, and you believe I followed him. I believe events did not conclude beneath the arch. He turned away, walking to the window. You underestimate me, he said quietly. In what way? If I had intended to murder him, he said, I would not have allowed such a letter to exist. And yet it does. His shoulders stiffened. I intended to retrieve it, he said. From Mr. Talbot. Yes, peacefully. He did not answer. I left him with the letter, in the lobby. The umbrella stood in its accustomed place, silent and unassuming. I reflected upon the irony. Mr. Pierce had ventured to the riverbank under cover of rain, perhaps believing the storm would obscure his actions. He had chosen an isolated meeting place masked by the thunder of trains. He had relied upon weather and noise to protect him. Yet, he had overlooked the most ordinary of witnesses. An umbrella is an object of utility, not suspicion. It accompanies its owner without comment. It shields, it supports, it waits. But when carried into rain, he remembers distinctly that your umbrella was absent from the stand shortly before noon, long enough to disturb his arrangement. The porter, startled at being addressed, nodded nervously. Mr. Pierce's composure tightened. Memory is imperfect, he said. Not when aligned with fact, I replied. Fourth, I said. The weather bulletin. A narrow band of rain fell only along the riverbank between 11:30 and 12:15. The city center remained dry. And, he asked, and your umbrella was wet. Silence descended. You see, I continued, water does not lie. It falls where it falls. It dries when it dries. It does not consult alibis. Miss Whitmore's gloved hands tightened. Mr. Pierce, I said softly, will you maintain that you did not leave the premises? He drew a slow breath. I will maintain, he said, that I did not leave in any manner relevant to Mr. Talbot's death. Ah, I replied. Now we approach precision. A faint stir moved through the room. You met Mr. Talbot at the riverbank, I said. He hesitated. Yes, he said at last. I met him. Under the railway arch. Yes. During the localized rain. Yes. You carried your umbrella. Yes. And you returned by the side entrance. He did not respond immediately. Then, yes. The admission settled heavily. You see, I said to the room at large, we are no longer concerned with whether Mr. Pierce left the hotel. We are concerned with what occurred when he returned. Mr. Pierce's eyes sharpened. You attempt to entrap me in contradictions, he said. I do not entrap, I replied. I illuminate. I walked slowly toward the umbrella stand and lifted the black silk canopy gently. An umbrella, I said, is the most loyal of witnesses. It absorbs the climate of its journey and carries it home. It does not forget the rain that touched it, nor the earth that clung to it. It does not choose what to reveal. It reveals by simply being what it is. I let the silk fall softly back into place. The wet silk was a confession written in droplets, I continued. When I observed it that afternoon, no rain had fallen in the square, yet it glistened. That glisten betrayed geography. Mr. Pierce remained silent. Water, I said, is patient. It weakens stone over time. It dissolves paper, if left long enough, and it weakens denial. His jaw tightened. You confronted Mr. Talbot by the river, I said. He possessed a letter, bearing your signature, evidence of financial betrayal. You believed the rain would obscure your presence there. I believed nothing of the sort, he replied sharply. You believed the storm would wash away your footprints. That is absurd. He stared at me. You forgot that it would return wet to a dry lobby. You forgot that clay would cling to its ferrule. You forgot that the porter would notice its absence. You forgot that I would count. His denial weakened like paper left in water. I accuse you of falsehood based on rain, I replied. Murder is another matter. A tense silence followed. Let us consider the sequence, I said calmly. You met Mr. Talbot at the riverbank. There was argument. There was a letter. There was struggle. The clay records it. He left that meeting alive. You cannot prove that, Mr. Pierce said. I can prove that he was seen in the hotel afterward, I replied. Several guests observed him returning near 1 o'clock. He spoke with Miss Whitmore in the corridor. He entered his room. Miss Whitmore nodded faintly. So the confrontation by the river did not end in death, I continued. It ended in unresolved threat. Mr. Pierce's composure faltered for a fraction of a second. You returned to the hotel, I said. You placed the umbrella in the stand. You resumed your seat in the lounge. You smoked your pipe. He said nothing. Then, at some later hour, Mr. Talbot was found dead in his locked room. The air in the lounge seemed to contract. Water, I said quietly, has already told us where you were at noon. It has told us you lied about leaving. It has told us you had reason to confront him. The umbrella has testified to your movements. What remains is to understand the final act. Mr. Pierce rose abruptly. You presume too much, he said. Do I? I asked gently. He looked around the room, at Miss Whitmore, at the concierge, at the porter, at the silent guests drawn by tension. You would condemn me because of damp silk, he said bitterly. No, I replied. I would convict you because you underestimated water. A murmur passed. Water, I continued, does not shout. It does not accuse. It simply reveals contrast. A wet object in a dry room is an impossibility unless carried there. An umbrella that glistens when the sky is blue is a contradiction. Contradictions unravel narratives. He remained standing rigid. You met Mr. Talbot in secret, I said. You denied it. The umbrella contradicted you. Your denial dissolved. Now we move forward. He looked at me with an expression that mingled anger and calculation. You have not proven I entered his room, he said. Not yet. I agreed softly. I returned the umbrella to its place. The most loyal of witnesses has spoken, I said. It has told us of rain that fell only by the river. It has told us of clay that did not belong. It has told us of a journey concealed. I looked directly at Mr. Pierce. And once a man lies about where he has been, it becomes necessary to ask where else he has walked unseen. The lounge remained silent. Outside, the night air lay dry and still. Inside, the truth, like water, had begun to erode resistance. The wet silk had indeed been a confession written in droplets. And now, as I observed Mr. Pierce's rigid posture and the faint sheen upon his brow, I saw another form of moisture at work. Denial, too, dissolves, if one waits long enough. Chapter 10. The Return of the Lie. It is a curious thing. The moment when composure dissolves. It does not shatter like glass, it softens, like wax exposed to steady heat. The form remains recognizable for a time, but its rigidity yields, its edges blur, and at last the truth, long contained, seeps through. In the lounge of the Grand Meridian, beneath the civil glow of evening lamps and the steady tick of the mantel clock, Mr. Leonard Pierce's composure reached that point of surrender. He had risen when I concluded my remarks on water. He entered the hotel. He spoke with Miss Whitmore. He retired to his room. Mr. Pierce's face drained of color. Then he survived, he murmured. For a time, the silence that followed was not the silence of calculation. It was the silence of realization. He must have followed me, he whispered. He must have come after. Perhaps, I said, or perhaps he left after you. His hands trembled now openly. I returned to the hotel, he said. I came through the side entrance, I believed. I believed the rain would have erased the evidence. I believed no one had seen us. You placed the umbrella in the stand, I said. Yes, you resumed your seat in the lounge. Yes, you smoked your pipe. Yes, and you believed the matter concluded. He nodded slowly. I intended to leave the next morning, he said, to put distance between myself and everything. But you overlooked the umbrella stand, I said gently. He let out a hollow breath. Yes, You believed the borrowed exit invisible? Yes. You rehearsed the lie? Yes, but water remembers where it has fallen. He gave a faint, broken laugh. Water, he repeated. Yes, I said. Water. Turned slightly toward the others. Mr. Pierce believed the narrow storm would shield him from inquiry. He believed the rain by the river would wash away his footprints, blur the clay, dissolve the moment. He believed that by returning swiftly, by entering through the servant's door, by placing the umbrella back among its companions, he could restore symmetry. I gestured toward the stand, but symmetry does not erase interruption, it reveals it. Mr. Pierce sank back into his chair. I did not kill him in his room, he said quietly, clinging to geography as though it were innocence. That, I replied, is already examined, his head lifted sharply. You think, I said, that your quarrel did not end the matter. You wounded him and left him. He returned to the hotel. Alive, as you now know, and he locked his door because he feared you. But you did not need to enter. The weapon was already waiting. The room seemed to contract around us. But your lie, I continued, was the first thread, and once drawn, it unraveled everything. Mr. Talbot was killed by a thin stiletto, like blade concealed inside the ferrule of your umbrella, an elegant contrivance, very much the sort a man of strategic arrangements might possess. At the riverbank you planted clay and water upon it. At the hotel you returned it to public view. Later, when Mr. Talbot reached for his dispatch case, believing it held the papers he needed, you offered him the umbrella as a courtesy at his door, and when he turned to take it the blade struck cleanly at the upward angle we observed. Then you withdrew it, closed the umbrella, and left it dripping in the stand. The door remained locked because Mr. Talbot locked it himself before opening to you. You required only the briefest access to the threshold, not the room. He covered his face briefly with his hands. I never intended murder, he said. Few do, I replied softly. Miss Whitmore rose slowly. You left Henry to the river, she said, her voice steady despite its tremor. And you left Mr. Talbot to the clay. He did not look at her. I never meant, but you chose silence over help, she said, twice. Her words fell with more force than accusation. The concierge shifted uneasily. The porter stared fixedly at the floor. I allowed the silence to deepen. Justice does not always begin with thunder. It often begins with a discrepancy, something out of place, something that does not align. In this case, it began with a single wet umbrella in a dry lobby. Mr. Pierce, I said at last, you may yet claim that Mr. Talbot's death in his room was independent of your actions. That will be examined. But your deception regarding the meeting by the river, your attempt to conceal the confrontation, and your failure to seek assistance when you left him injured, these are facts. He lowered his hands slowly. Yes, he said. Outside the night remained calm. No storm gathered above the Grand Meridian. The sky held its clear indifference. Yet within that orderly lobby, beneath polished brass and aligned handles, truth had risen like moisture from stone. The umbrella stood where it had stood all day. It had not shouted. It had not accused. It had simply carried rain from one place to another. And in doing so, it had undone a lie, rehearsed with care. The borrowed exit had seemed invisible. The denial had seemed convincing. The storm had seemed an ally. But water remembers where it has fallen. And thus, in the composed elegance of the Grand Meridian, justice began not with thunder, but with a single wet umbrella.